Hello and welcome to another episode of Better Together. I'm your host, Ryan Eldridge. Hello, we're joined here today on another episode of Better Together. I'm joined here by good friend Travis Ellis, retired police chief, entrepreneur, all around. Went from law enforcement to businessman, man. Thanks for coming in and joining us today.
Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to discussing some things with you.
So you started your your life as a police officer. When did you get into police work? What'd you do? How'd that all come about?
Yeah, I did. So I remember I got like a lot of tickets in high school, and I just remember probably the last one I got. I thought, man, this would kind of be a cool job. I wouldn't mind doing this. So actually, when I had my daughter. We were seniors in high school. So I had my daughter very young, and then I waited till I was 21. And then once I was 21, I started applying to different police departments, and started working actually with the Nicholasville Police in 1998. That was my first law enforcement job.
In Nicholasville.
Nicholasville.
I know a couple of guys that kind of started. Beau, what's Beau's last name?
Morgan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Did you work with him?
Yeah, I worked with him before he went to Versailles, and then actually the chief down there now. He was the chief, Todd Justice. I don't know if he's still chief down there or not, but he was actually in my academy class. We were hired at the same time. Me and
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good place.
Beau's a good dude. He was good friends with my wife, and I remember when my wife and I got together, Beau had reached out to her. He was up here. I think he came up here for in-service or something. He's like, Melanie, I ain't seen you in a while. We should get together for dinner. And Melanie's like, hey, I got this friend, and I was like, all right, that's fine. I met him. Beau and I clicked right away.
Yeah, he was always a good dude.
He'll always reach out every once in a while and see how things are going.
Right,
and,
right.
He's another one that's still in law enforcement.
I
Hasn't
know.
quite got out of it.
Still is,
yeah. It kind of reminds me of my dad. My dad spent 23 years in law enforcement. Got out to go be a minister full time and did that for like 13 years and. Left the church, went to be a chaplain at Turfway Racetrack for about 7 years, and now next thing you know, he's back in law enforcement at the courthouse in Big County. So it's like he's the same way, just can't get away from it. Still training dogs.
Yeah.
So after Nicholasville, where'd the path lead you from there?
So in about 2000, I was actually living in Anderson County, Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and I was driving to Nicholasville, and it was a pretty good haul. Of course, Frankfort was right down the road, so at that point in time, and they say the average law enforcement officer is going to work for 3 different departments, which is about right. I only worked for 2, so in 2000 I applied to Frankfort because it was literally 10 minutes from the house, and it was literally the best move I ever made because I got hired in Frankfort in 2001, and then of course I retired from there, so it was a really good move. Nicholasville was a great department too. I liked it down there. It was just a matter of travel. Frankfort was closer for me, and so once I got hired on up there, eventually we wound up moving up there and kind of making our home and raising our kids there in Frankfort.
And, you spent how many years in Frankfort?
So I was in Frankfort for 20 years.
24 years?
Yeah.
And what all the different things did you do when you were with Frankfort Police? You started out as a lowly
patrolman? Yeah, I was on the low pole, man. I was working night shift, doing the, running around, working a beat, working a sector, and kind of just worked my way up. I think I worked either nights or second shift for probably a good 15 years of my career. Because it was just so hard to get to day shift.
Yeah, I spent 10 years on seconds
really?
Before I finally made it to day shift.
Okay, yeah, so I was just a patrolman, and then probably I'd been in Frankfort maybe 7 years when I took the promotional test and got promoted to sergeant. But in the meantime, I did a stint with our TAC team, so I was on the tactical team for several years, and then I did a lot of FTOing, did a lot of training. And I think that training... it can. Yeah.
It's almost as stressful as just dealing with the citizens themselves and the situations that you encounter. And
with police, that type A personality, we really like to have control of what's going on. So as a training officer and sitting in that passenger seat, it's difficult. But I will tell you, the training younger and newer guys made me a better cop.
Correct.
You know what I mean? And it also really kind of led me into the supervisor role. So that's kind of what got me into it.
And I always took from being an FTO that, it allowed me to have a say and a control over molding these younger officers.
Absolutely.
And I always told them, I said, listen, you're going to go through several different FTOs throughout this process. Each one of us police differently in a way, but very similar.
Yeah.
You know, your job is to go to each FTO, police the way that they want you to police, do the things that they want you to do, get through the FTO program, and at the end of it, I want you to take a culminating factor of all of them, mold them together, and turn yourself into a mold of all 4 or 5 FTOs that you went through. Because if you do that, then that's going to allow you to be an even better police officer. Because, you know, there was guys that policed way differently than me, but majority of the FTOs at least policed somewhat similar.
Yeah.
They just had different finicky things that they like to see done, whether it be how you write a report, so on and so forth. You know,
and it's funny because and a lot of younger officers, they wind up taking over the, you know, that initial training officer that they get with has so much influence over them. Because I remember I remember my FTO, Dave Bunton, and he was, you know, straight, no nonsense. You know, he was a really good cop, but he did it a certain way. And then I find myself doing it that way for so many years until I finally, you know, developed my own style of policing. So, you know, that FTO thing it's a big responsibility. You know, you can either make or break a lot of young guys if you don't have the proper people to train them, which I think that transcends into all forms of business and, you know, private or public sector.
So after how many years do you finally decide, you know what, I'm sick of being a patrolman?
Yeah.
It's time to move to a slightly cushier job.
Yeah, about 7 years. I promoted to sergeant. I was sergeant on night shift. And then it went quick after that. Like a couple years after that, I promoted to lieutenant, went to second shift. A couple years after that, I promoted to captain, and I actually went into records for a while. So I actually was running our records division there for a couple years. And I was actually in records until one of the assistant chiefs retired. And then when they retired, we had 2 assistant chiefs, so 2 majors. When they both retired, Rob Richardson and Rob Warfel, super close friends of mine, I got promoted to assistant chief, and then that's where I stayed until I was named the chief of police.
How long did you do that for?
The chief?
Yeah.
Not very long. Not very long. And I tell you, it's funny. You get in that position and people don't understand it unless you've kind of been there. But it's one of those things you're like, man, I just hope one day I can get that. I can be the chief. And then you become the chief and you're like, oh, gosh. Because, you know, it's a different animal. The phone never stops. You just, you know, I don't want to say you become a politician per se, but it's a different type of, you know, it's an administrative job. That's all it is, you know.
Correct.
Balancing a budget, trying to hire the right kind of people. And after a while, it was just one of those things, you know, once you attain something like that, a goal, there was really nowhere else for me to go.
Yeah.
So my whole thing with that is, you know, I found myself getting really complacent with what I was doing, which doesn't help the organization. So I knew I had the time in. So I
complacency is, you know, one of the biggest killers of a lot of cops. You know, as you start to get into that profession, and the longer you spend in one position, or the longer you spend on the street, getting complacent with the same alarm drop over and over again, or the same domestic over and over again. You know, I used to tell my wife all the time, I said, you know, I enjoy going to police week, not for, you know, all of the friends we get to hang out with and so on and so forth, but, you know, when they're putting those names on the wall of all of the officers going on to do the year prior, each year, that's my complacency shock.
Sure.
I've heard the stories of the officers that are there that had close calls. I'm watching all these officers and hearing the stories where they didn't make it through.
Right.
And I'd come back home and it would be my complacency check to say, hey man, you got to stop, you know, being complacent with the things that you're doing.
Absolutely.
And so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
You know. So I'm sure we got a lot of viewers, you know, they hear you're from Frankfort, you're straight from Bourbon Country down there.
Yeah.
You know, same with my wife. And, you know, I'm just curious, you know, Frankfort got known for something pretty well off and popular over how long ago was that? Probably.
That was, what was it? It was 2000 and I want to say around probably between 2012 maybe 2016 in that time frame. So
yeah,
right
I mean,
in there.
You know, big thing known for Frankfort is Buffalo Trace Distillery. And big products, big names in bourbon that come out of Buffalo Trace Distillery, and a huge headline that made national news that brought a lot of attention down there to little old Frankfort. What can you tell us about the good old Pappy Gate?
Well, the Pappy Gate, you know, that was one of those things, again, I think when that happened, I was actually in records, so I wasn't on the road when that happened. But I remember it was a huge story. I mean, everybody was talking about it, and one of the things we ran into is, unfortunately, we had a sheriff down there at the time that really invited the media in. He was a little bit too transparent, if that's even possible. But it was just one of those things that a little story would get made into it's like the JFK assassination. I mean, geez, oh Pete, it was. But it wound up being a lot of bourbon that had been stolen, and then I didn't know a whole lot more than what some of the other people learned when they watched the Netflix documentary. You know what I mean? Other than just it was on every piece of paper down there. It was on the news, and I know, and there was talk about officers being involved and stuff like that. I can say wholeheartedly that I didn't know anybody that was involved in any of that stuff other than what I was getting off the news from everybody else. Because at the time, the sheriff's office and the PD down there did not have the best of relationships, so there was not a lot of information sharing and stuff like that. Too many egos got involved. So. Yeah, it was a wild time. I didn't have a whole lot to do with it, but it was interesting, and it I guess in a counterproductive way, it wound up bringing a lot of people to Frankfort. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people wanted to see Buffalo Trace and see all the other different bourbon places down there.
See if they could sneak away with their own Pappy Gate.
Yeah. It was interesting when you go back and watch some of that and learn like how that case was solved and how just how far out it actually went. I think I was watching like. One of the guys went to Virginia or West Virginia or something. Who knows? But it's a lot of money too. You don't realize. I mean, anybody that drinks bourbon and understands bourbon knows how expensive that stuff can be, especially when we're talking about barrels of it.
Oh, you're talking about barrels of it. You're talking about. We're not talking in MSRP. We're not talking about the retail price that technically it should be sold for and things like that. We're talking the money they were dealing in was the secondary market.
Yeah.
And the secondary market right now, when it comes to Pappy Van Winkle or a lot of things, the Wellers and the E.H. Taylors that are coming out of, or the B-Tax series that is coming out of Buffalo Trace.
Right.
I mean, that retail price doesn't even come close to what people across the nation, across the world are willing to pay for this bourbon.
Oh, I know. I know.
And I truly feel that after Pappy Gate, that the secondary market on it went even higher.
Yeah.
It not only brought attention to Buffalo Trace in a sense once they made the documentary and once people found out about it, bringing tourists and things like that just wanted to come down and see Buffalo Trace because now this huge headline has been made out of it. But the secondary market just took it and they just ran with it. Like, oh, look at this,
And it was funny watching the documentary there on Netflix because a lot of people obviously in it I knew, because Frankfurt's a small town. It's one of those places that everybody kind of knows everybody. To an extent, which sometimes can be a bad thing, because then everybody, has an opinion or, that was the thing with that is everybody was just kind of running rampant with their own theory on what they thought had happened. I'm glad it's in the past.
Now, what did, Pappy Gate comes along, at that point you're a captain, and, with that and all the attention that it brought, do you feel like it changed anything as far as policing and procedure-wise with your all's department? Especially as speculations between, officers being involved with it and so on and so forth. And did it help the relationship with the sheriff's department or hurt it more?
No, it definitely hurt it. It hurt it until a new sheriff was elected. The sheriff down in Franklin County right now is a young man named Chris Squire. Super good dude. He actually worked with me at the Frankfort PD. So he was at Frankfort for over 10 years before he decided to run for sheriff and got elected. But once Chris got elected down there, everything really started going the way it should have been going. In today's day and age with all the craziness that goes on in the world, all these PDs should be sharing information and working together. You know what I mean? That's just the way it's got to be. That people got to learn to put those egos aside. And, and a lot of people, unfortunately, just, especially when it comes to a position like sheriff, it's an elected position, right? It's not, you're not just going in there for a job interview, like a lot of other places like Frankfort was. So with that being elected position, sometimes I see why they call the media in for certain things, but you can do it too much and blow it up to where it's counterproductive. And then, you don't want your town to have so much attention all the time about negative stuff. You want positive things and good stories to come out. And it seemed like there was a time down there when it was just every story that came out was something negative. You know what I mean? So, once there was a change of administration and stuff like that, from the sheriff's point of view, we started getting along really good.
Well, good. So you spent, you get promoted to chief. How long you spent a chief?
So I was so I got promoted. It was funny. I got promoted to major. My best friend, Jeff Abrams, was chief of police when I got promoted to assistant chief. And I was probably assistant chief for like maybe a month. And Jeff called me in his office one day and said, "Hey man, I hate to do this to you, but I'm retiring." And I thought he was joking. I'm like, I haven't even gotten through the handbook on what I'm supposed to be doing as the assistant chief yet, and now the chief's leaving. So Jeff left, retired, and then the city commission named me the interim chief while they did a search, and then they opened it up. I think they opened it up nationally, and then interviewed maybe 7, 8 different people. There were some inside applicants, obviously, that applied. I thought my interview went real well, and then after we did the interviews, probably 20 minutes later, the mayor came over and congratulated me and told me I was the new chief. It's kind of surreal. I was like, I guess I better get ready for this.
Like, they've gone national with this. What are the odds?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it was good. It was a good thing. I was excited to do it. I was very proud to do it. And my kids got to see it, which was a good thing. My kids were old enough to understand the recognition and understand the work that went into to get to that. I mean, I went back. I didn't have a college degree until I was in my mid-30s, and I went back to school and got 2 degrees just in hopes that I would have an opportunity to apply for the chief's job.
Yeah.
Because at the time, I believe there was a requirement for secondary education, so I went and did that. Which I'm still paying on my school loans like everybody else. But it was good, man. I was very proud to do it. I still miss it, miss it sometimes, thinking back, with the camaraderie of the guys. And there was a lot of programs that I wanted to implement and do that I just wasn't able to do just because you spend so much time in a position like that, putting out fires, that you don't really get to do a whole lot of the proactive stuff you want to do as far as implementing new programs and stuff like that. And I think frustration just set in for me to the point where I was just like, I've got my time and I can retire anytime I want. So that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's definitely, one of those careers that you have to sink your whole body and soul into. Mm-hmm. And then when it's time to say, hey, I'm going to go do something else, whether it be retiring, like in your case, or in my case, I left because the current direction that law enforcement was going, I felt that my time would be better spent building a better relationship with my family and my children. Sure. But I still remember, when I finally made that decision in my head, and I went to my chief. I still, though I told myself, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to go sit into the chief's office to tell him, that I'm going to be resigning in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, I still wasn't, like, I was expecting him to talk me out of it.
Really?
I was expecting him to say, Ryan, what are you doing?
Right.
And we sat down and we talked for probably an hour, and it was nothing but positivity from him.
That's great.
Basically saying, Ryan, I applaud you for, having the guts to do this.
Right.
I get 1,000% why you're doing it. And basically that, I wish you nothing but the best of luck. I hope it works out for you. You never have to come back to police work. But if you do, you always have a job with me,
That's great.
And then I was like, I just felt this sudden, like, release.
Oh, absolutely.
And I walk out and I call Melanie. I said, hey, tell our boss, tell your boss that I need that job because I just put my 2 weeks in. And she was like, you did? And I was like, yeah. She goes, okay, I'll call Frank right now and tell him that you're coming, So it was definitely one of those things that it wasn't something that I could really sit around and debate or wait, you know what I mean? Like, I felt like if I sat down and really, I spent several months contemplating it, going, hey, is there something else that I knew that I'd already had a place where I came into, but kind of weighing those options of, is it worth it? I've only got 6 more years left. I can retire with full pension. I can walk out of here.
Absolutely.
So I did my own internal, like, just mind-boggling over and over and over. Like,
it's a tough decision,
but it was probably one of the worst decisions and hardest decisions I've ever made. That ended up being the best decision I've ever made.
Absolutely.
Because my relationship with my kids, my family, I get to come to work with my wife every day. I get to do things like this with you.
Right. Yeah.
Over the past little over a year, how much things have just changed and where I started, when I first left and where I am now. But I have to say it was probably one of the worst decisions I ever made, as far as difficulty in making.
That is a difficult decision.
But I hear it's the same thing with retirement.
Yeah, it is, and it's scary because actually, I didn't know it, but so I retired, and I knew I didn't want to retire. I had no plan when I retired. I just retired. My wife used to live up here in Edgewood, so my daughter is an attorney up here. She's a defense attorney over in Cincinnati, which makes for some fun conversations, because she's a defense attorney and I was a cop. So, but my wife was from up here, so we decided we bought a house up here in Independence. I just thought I'd have more opportunity up in this area with the growth and everything that goes on up here, to find something, because like I said, when I retired, I had no plan.
Yeah.
I had no, and that was kind of scary. It's scary not having a plan, and then when you've been a police officer basically your entire life, it's hard not to be that anymore. So I was trying to, and I found, believe it or not, I got turned down for so many jobs because I kept being told I was overqualified.
Oh, don't you?
Yeah, and I was like, you can't, and I was like, man, this really stinks. So in the meantime, just so I had something to do, because I'm the type of person I can't not sit still. I got to be doing something. I've got to have a job. I need to have a purpose. I've always got to have a goal. Chris Quire, the sheriff down there, he offered me his chief deputy's position. So I accepted that, but I was driving from Independence to Frankfort every day going to work for the sheriff's office. And I knew that wasn't going to last. It was just too far of a drive, and we moved up here. And plus, I wanted to make my life up here. I didn't want to keep going back and forth. So after I retired and sat out the time you got to sit out before you can work again, I went back and worked for the sheriff's office for about 4 months, and that was it. After that, I was gone and done with law enforcement forever.
So after you did that, I mean, you started something successful. You became an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
What led you after going, you know what, I just can't make this drive, but people keep telling me I'm overqualified.
Yeah.
What led you into the entrepreneur that you are today?
I think I've always had that in me. It's funny. So when I was a young cop, struggling paycheck to paycheck, I had a factory job at Rand McNally when I was 18 years old, making like $14 an hour. I thought I was rich. That's a lot of money back then. I took a job with Nicholasville, and I took like a $4 pay cut because I wanted to be a police officer so bad. The money didn't matter. So I took that job, and so what I did, probably the first 5 years of my law enforcement career, I mowed lawns and did landscaping. So I had a trailer, a mower, did a bunch of churches with their landscaping. I had a bunch of, just local residential yards of a lot of elderly people that I mowed. So really I was doing, a part-time kind of a side hustle thing even when I was a cop. And I did that all the way up until I probably started promoting. And then at that point in time, I was so busy with the job that I couldn't do, something on the side anymore. Yeah. So I've kind of always had that entrepreneur spirit in me, you know what I mean? So when I was getting ready to retire, I started looking into different things, and again, like I said, no idea. My ex-brother-in-law lives in Louisville, and he has a home inspection company. And I don't know if he'll hear this or not, no offense to him if he does, but I was thinking, man, if this guy can do home inspections, it can't be that hard. That was my thought process, not knowing any better when I went into it. And then I went through the schooling and the training, got my certifications and my licenses and all that. And then I was up and running, just trying to build something with it.
So you come up here, you're living up here in Independence, and what have you found, especially when you were building your home inspection company, what have you found, during that process that allowed you to be successful doing, what are the main key factors that you did, that you set your mind to, that you said, I've got to do these things if I want this business to grow?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that I did was just doing right by my customers, no matter what, doing right by them, right? So if that meant, going back out 3 or 4 times to somebody's house to look at something, I did. I didn't charge them for it. I did a lot of, obviously we discounted all veterans, law enforcement, medical personnel, because, I'd been in that field. I understood, we didn't necessarily make the most money. So I wanted to be able to, have a clientele like that and be able to discount those things. So I started doing that. And the biggest thing for me was just getting out and meeting people, just the networking aspect of it that I had really never done as a police officer. Now, once I became chief, I started getting into that a little bit more. But when you have to do it to, for food and to pay your bills and stuff like that, I mean, you'll get out there and join some networking groups and meet people. But it was really good because, the more people, I met, the more relationships I started to develop, the more work I started getting, you know what I mean? So it really, I think relationships was the biggest key for me to get my business off the ground and get it running to where I had it, after 3 years. I mean, after 3 years, I had more work than I could take on. I hired a couple other inspectors to try and help me, keep up with the demand. But I mean, the market with the houses has been quite, hectic for the past 3 years. So there was no shortage of homes to inspect. Let's just say that. So, yeah.
So if you're talking to a young entrepreneur out there that's looking to do something more and really use their imagination to create their own business, what would be the number one advice that you would give them to get out there and stop putting it off and just do it?
Just don't be afraid to take a chance. I mean, it's one of those things that, and I'll explain that here in a little bit, but like what I'm doing right now is I'm taking a chance with the job I have right now. And it was the same thing with inspections. I had no idea how to run a business, how to do books, how to, get a client list, none of that.
I feel you there.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things that, if you're thinking about doing something and you believe in yourself and you believe in your own ability, I know it's kind of cliche when people say you can do anything you put your mind to, but, you really can't. It's just a matter of I think you have to be able to take the risk and take the chance. I've had a lot of guys call me and says, man, I'd love to start an inspection company, but I don't want to give up my job. I just want to do it kind of a couple of days a week. And I tell them, honestly, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work because you're not going to be available for all the times you need to be, and then people are going to stop referring you work. So it's, unfortunately, with the inspections, for me, it was all in or nothing. Yeah. And thank gosh I had my retirement, so I was able to to take that risk and do it. But it was a risk that was worth taking.
I just posted a post yesterday, and it was I can't remember, Bob Proctor, I believe, did a speech, I want to say in the 90s or 80s, and it was called "Just Do It." And he talks about he's holding one of the sand time dials. And he's talking. He was like, so many people have been through much in life, and yet they continue to focus on all this time that has passed.
Yeah.
And he said, our time's limited. None of us know how much time we have left on this earth, or how much time we have left to do, the things that we want to do, because at any point in time, your time can be taken away, or it can be affected in a way that it wouldn't allow you to do, what you wanted to do.
Absolutely.
And he was like, but, majority of society spends so much time looking at the time that has passed, looking at our past that we have no control over.
Right.
And we're spending all of this time that passes through that narrow passageway before it falls down, trying to say, well, this is what happened in the past. And he was like, we need to stop paying attention to that and look at our future.
Yeah.
And just do it.
Yeah.
If you have something, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to take that risk, if you want to take that leap, obviously you always want to make sure that you're in a position to best succeed. But in life, I used to tell recruits, and I still tell people to this day, we learn as long as, you're allowed to make failures, you're allowed to screw up.
Yeah.
Because none of us, we're imperfect humans. We're all going to make mistakes throughout our lives.
Right.
It's all about learning from those mistakes, learning from those failures, and what you do in the future to correct them and not repeat them. And it's the same thing that goes along.
And I think for young people getting into any business, it's not just home inspections, but there's so much good information out there now. I mean, there's more people out there right now that are building their own business and their own brands than ever before. And it's because there's just so much information available to you out there right now. But I think I would warn some people, be careful about the people who want to sell you a program and tell you how to become a millionaire doing what you're doing, because if that was the case, they really would still be doing what they were doing. They wouldn't be selling a program. So if you can find a good mentor, someone that really genuinely is not afraid to share some tips and secrets and stuff. When I had people call me when I had my inspection business, I was never afraid to tell them what I was doing. Like, I was buying home warranties. I gave all my clients a home warranty. That gave me a leg up on a lot of other competition because I was one of the few that was buying home warranties. So when I'd have a young guy go, hey, man, how do I get an inspection business going? I would tell him that. I would tell him all that because I truly believe that the more you give people, the more you're going to get back. In return, you're going to get that back. Somewhere down the road, somehow, you'll get that back.
Well, in my last episode that I did with the Crypto Crow, that's basically what he based his platform off of when he created his YouTube channel and things like that. It wasn't about making money off of people or anything like that. He truly just wanted to share what he did to put himself in the position that he was in so that you could repeat what he did and be just as successful as
my
him.
wife used to make fun of me because I literally would probably get a couple calls a week. I had a lot of good, friends that were realtors, and they would have somebody that wanted to go into inspections, and they'd send them to me, they'd call me, and I would spend a lot of time talking to people on the phone. And finally, my wife was like, "Why don't you just become a consultant? just open a school and show." And I was like, "That's a pretty good idea," but we didn't do it. And like I said, I never had a problem telling people because at the end of the day, you're still going to be doing the work that you're doing. As long as you're doing a good job, it doesn't hurt to share some of that stuff with other people that are trying to get into the business or trying to. Plus, I want to refer. There's a lot of times we couldn't do an inspection, and I wanted a good person to refer that over to. So. And then there was other inspectors out there that wouldn't even talk to you. It's all secret, and those are the ones that didn't have nothing to do with. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
I was talking to somebody the other day, and I basically told him, I said, sometimes in the fields that we're in, outside of well, you even saw it in law enforcement, but so many people try to make it a competition, like a personal competition, them against the world.
Yes.
And I was like, there's nothing wrong with competition. Competition is good, it can help motivate people, but it's how you truly perceive that competition.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, same mindset, I could, in the mortgage business now, but I have no problem if somebody from some other mortgage company wants to reach out to me and say, hey man, what are you all doing? I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
It's then, like, I want everybody to have the ability and the potential to be just as successful, to achieve the same goals and the same lifestyle or whatever it is. Like, why would I hinder people from doing it? My goal is to come up with new ideas that continue to make me stand out, and then my reputation would then carry it. But I'm going to give you the basics of what what we do and how we do it because I want to see you be successful too.
Absolutely, I've always said this.
I'm friends with several LOs, on my Facebook that I have no problem saying, "Man, way to go! You don't work for me." But it's awesome to see that you're still able to be out there, be successful for your family, for yourself, so on and so forth. I just refuse to think in that mindset of like, no, man, it's all about me. It's all about me.
Yeah. And the thing is when you get down right to it, there's tons of business out there for people. You know what I mean?
Oh,
doesn't. I mean, given your job, what you do, and what I do, we couldn't do it all. So there's got to be other people out there that's doing a good job and stuff like that. So I don't get too tied up into that. I just try and worry about myself, control what I can control.
Correct.
And then everything else just kind of falls into place. And I used to tell that not only to my officers but to my kids too. Stop focusing, worrying so much about stuff that you have no control over. You have no say in it. Why even give it a thought?
Why
you know what I mean?
Stressing about it.
Don't waste your time with it.
That's a tough, and I feel like it's a conversation my wife and I have a lot. Is she'll get frustrated and stressed about things, and I'm like, why? You have zero control over that.
Right.
It's nothing that you did.
Right.
It's nothing that you can change.
Yeah.
Why are you letting it affect you the way that you are? And I'm like, you just got to move on. Like, and the same thing, sometimes you're not going to please every customer.
Right. Absolutely.
And I always used to tell her in police work, there were some people that we dealt with that it didn't matter what we told them. If it wasn't what they wanted to hear, they were going to call and complain regardless.
My daughter is learning that the hard way right now, so she's a defense attorney, works for the public defender's office. Well, obviously, she gets sometimes some shady clients, right? And if the case doesn't go the way the client wants it, or if they actually go to trial and they lose, it's always her fault. She's always being blamed for it. And I said, you just sometimes that's just the way life is. There's nobody else to blame. They got to point the finger at somebody, and you just happen to be there. It's like that with a lot of people, but it shouldn't affect you and what you're doing. You know what I mean? So I was always telling my wife when we would talk about kind of stuff that you and yours were talking about, when I would tell her just to worry about the things you control. The other thing to kind of help them is I was like, find one thing each day to be thankful for. Yeah. Just one. Just as you go about your day, find one thing during the day you can stop and tell yourself, man, I'm really glad that that's going on, or I'm really glad I've got good health, whatever it is, because I think that positivity and that outlook on things, I'm a big manifestation guy. I really believe, we can, your reality is what you make it. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, if you want to have a bad attitude and you cry all the time, that's kind of how your life's going to be.
You can choose to just be happy
absolutely.
every day.
Absolutely.
And how you control the way that things
right.
affect you. Yeah. So you started up this company. You did it for about 3 years.
Yeah.
What made you change directions again?
Yeah, so we had it. We sold it at 3.5 years. Last year, right before Christmas, I went there for a while and was really working 7 days a week for a long time. Like I said, I was able to hire a couple other part-time inspectors, but they had full-time jobs, so they were only available at certain times. And then when I would look to try and to get your license for it is actually a pretty tough test. It is a tough test. And I was having a lot of people when I was hiring that would come to me and want a job, but they didn't have their license. And it's a process to get it. So I just kind of felt like it got to the point, my wife was running our office, doing all of our bookings, stuff like that. It got to the point where I was working so much harder than I did when I was a police officer that I just thought, this isn't really how I thought retirement was going to be. I mean, I was super ecstatic and pumped that I got to where I was, but then again, once I got there, it was kind of like the Chief thing. Once I got there and I felt like I was on top, I didn't feel like I had anywhere else to go, and I wanted a new challenge. So I just told my wife, I'm like, hey, what do you think about us selling this? And she's like, absolutely. So, because she answered the phone pretty much 7 days a week, all the time. You know how that goes. So
and every time I try to call you, next thing you know, I'm getting.
We put it up for sale.
I'm pretty sure I called Travis. Like, hey, what's going on here?
We put it up for sale, and then within a matter of like 3 days, a gentleman in Atlanta had called me. And we went back and forth and finally, agreed to terms, and I sold it to him.
And then you did what? Because you didn't retire.
No,
like
didn't
you
retire.
still couldn't just say, hey.
No. So before we got into the
business.
inspection business, my wife had been in insurance for about 2 decades. Mm-hmm. She worked with several different agencies in Cincinnati and in Kentucky. Me and her had actually talked about investing some money and opening our own agency. That was what we were going to do. Open our own place. During that time, I made contact back again with a good friend of mine in Jim Westfall. I met with him during a B&I networking group. Became real close friends with him. Well, Jim had his own office. He was kind of an independent agent out of Burlington here in Kentucky. And he called me and just said, hey, man, what would you think about, kind of partner up with me? Come in and do some contract work for me. And I thought, man, it'd be great. So I talked to my wife. I said, hey, what do you think? She's like, oh, you'll be great. You'll sell insurance. And I was like, okay. It's a lot tougher than what they told me it was going to be. So I went out, got all my licenses, did all that stuff, and then I've been working with Jim ever since.
And what do you mainly do there?
So, my agency writes everything. I mean, I've got clients on the books from business accounts to homes to cars, but I do a lot of Medicare and life. Medicare a lot because a lot of these seniors who are turning 65 really don't have anybody to sit down and talk with them, right? They're getting bombarded with infomercials and mail and letters. Like my mom signed up for something because of a brochure in the mail, and she signed up for like the wrong thing. She didn't even get what she should have had. And so I thought, that would be pretty rewarding to sit down with someone who's turning 65 and kind of help them navigate that process to make sure they have the right health insurance in place through Medicare, because it can get a little tricky. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing right now, and it's like I said, to find a job that I can do that I feel it's rewarding, that's a bonus, that's a plus.
I feel like that's something with both of us in our past experience that we both look for. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think it's a huge trait that we both carry into the different aspects of life and entrepreneur careers that we continue to take on. Is that we never stop truly focusing on our community, and wanting to do what's right by them.
And it's funny too. I got an appointment Friday with a client. One of my clients that has a water issue in his house. I'm still a licensed home inspector, so it's kind of cool. Like I'm his insurance agent, but I'm going out there to find where this water leak is coming from because I know houses. So that's kind of been a cool thing too with this. Although I'm insuring the houses now and I'm not inspecting them, as far as what they should have and what they shouldn't have, I really understand that because that's what I was doing for over 3 years. I mean, I did over 5,000 home inspections, so I got really really good at it. So it's good. I like it. I enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to growing this. I mean, we're not totally saying that we aren't going to open up our own agency at some point in time, but for right now, working with Jim, he's a really good mentor. He's a good guy. He does mission trips and really helps out a lot of people. If you surround yourself with good people like that, you're going to be successful as well. So I'm glad that I have him in my corner right now.
So you're saying seeing that power couple back together is not out of the question?
No, not out of the question at all. No. Actually, my wife, again, like I said, she went back into insurance, but she doesn't work with me. She works for another company, so it's kind of funny. She works from home, but she'll ask me about stuff, and I'll be like, I can't tell you. That's only our agency can know that.
No, ma'am. Well, if people want to reach out to you, if they want to get in contact, what's the best way to get in contact with you? Facebook? You got a Facebook?
FacePlace, you can find me on there. I do a lot of marketing, a lot of videos on there.
I got you tagged in the video,
so
it's easy to find your...
That's an easy one, and then if you go to my Facebook page, my cell number's listed on there. It's also listed on my business cards and stuff, so it's not too hard to get hold of us. And it's Jim Westfall Insurance down in Burlington. We're right next to the courthouse over there on Washington Street.
Awesome, man. You were one of the first people when I left law enforcement. My wife had reached out to you when she got into this profession and got to know you, and then when I left, you were one of the first people I reached out with and sat down with and brainstormed.
Right.
I just want to thank you for all the advice that you gave me, for taking the time to meet with me and forming the friendship that we now have.
Absolutely.
You still owe me some drinks by your pool.
I do.
Sometime.
We're going to knock that out. I promise.
But I just want you to know you have been a true inspiration to me to watch you. We have similar backgrounds, and to see that you can come out of a profession that we were in and do something else other than that. I do feel like a lot of our first responders feel like they can't, or they struggle with disconnecting from it and realizing that you almost don't realize the type of candidate that the police department makes you.
Right.
Because we were psychologists, we were psychiatrists, we were
social workers,
marriage counselors. I mean, I remember being 21, never been married, not in a really long, never had a really long relationship at that point, and I'm walking into a house of a domestic between two 50-year-olds, and I'm trying to tell them how to make their marriage work.
Right.
I'd never been married. How am I supposed to to give this advice? But you
learn
learn real quickly, the things to say, the things not to say.
Absolutely.
But I don't think they realize the potential they have, that they don't have to stay in. It's great, do your time, stay as long as you want, but do realize that you can be an entrepreneur just like yourself and go out and start your own business, go do something else.
Absolutely.
And still create a very successful life for yourself, for your family, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for taking your time when I first got out and giving me the advice you gave me and continuing to be here for me.
You're doing great, man. I watch you all the time. I think everything you're doing is right on par with what you should be doing, and I'm even going to probably steal a couple of your tricks as well. So.
It's okay. They're out there.
I'll give you the credit, though.
So once again, thanks for joining us here. This is another episode of Better Together with Travis Ellis, former police chief of Frankfort, entrepreneur, insurance guy now, maybe insurance guy again, power couple back together. We'll see what the future holds for you, but I don't feel like you're truly retiring.
No, not anytime soon.
All right, man. Well, we appreciate you watching. Hope we can catch you again on the next episode. Thank you.